It's the year 1504 in Jamaica. Christopher Columbus's final voyage has turned into a disaster. His ships lie broken on the coast and his men are starving. Months of hardship have left them diseased and desperate. They beg the islanders for food and their pleas are met with silence. Facing ruin, Columbus turns to the sky. Summoning the local chiefs, he gestures to the heavens and he warns them that his God is angry, and soon he will show a sign. That night, as the moon climbs the sky, the prophecy takes shape. A shadow creeps across its face. The light fades until the moon burns dark red. Terror spreads across the island. The natives bring food and water. The starving Spaniards devour it in desperation. By turning to the heavens, Columbus had saved his men. Using calculations and his knowledge of the moon cycles, he correctly predicted a lunar eclipse. This wouldn't be the first time that Columbus almost died in these foreign lands, but first we need to tell the story of how he got here. This video is not meant to be a moral authority on whether Columbus was a brave man or a demon. There's plenty of videos out there that you can watch that cover that part. Instead, this will be a narrative review of the first-hand accounts of the 4 voyages that Columbus made. In the late 15th century, sailors told of strange carved wood drifting across the Azores, of unfamiliar bodies washing up on beaches, causing a few to speculate that land might be far to the west. Scholars agreed the Earth was a globe, but no one knew just how far it stretched. Marco Polo's tales of the riches of Asia still burned in the imagination of Europe, and yet spices, silk, and gold grew ever more costly, taxed at every stop along the overland routes from the east. Whoever found a new path would control a fortune. Christopher Columbus, the son of a weaver from Genoa, was drawn to the sea in his youth. While Columbus is traditionally said to have been born in Genoa, his true origins remain debated. One interesting theory holds that he was actually a Spanish Jewish converso who concealed his ancestry to avoid persecution under the Catholic monarchs during the Inquisition. Supporters point to his vague early life, missing birth records, use of Castilian Spanish, and even Hebrew phrases in his writings as evidence. By his teens, he was sailing on merchant ships, traveling on the coast of Africa, and perhaps as far as Iceland. For a time, he made his base on the Portuguese island of Madeira in the Atlantic. It was there that he watched Portugal inch closer and closer to discovering a new route to Asia on the southern tip of Africa, a route that would bypass the Muslim trade roads, unlocking immense wealth. Columbus envisioned a different path. After years of studying maps and hearing of strange objects drifting in the western seas, he became convinced that Asia could be reached by sailing straight across the Atlantic. Portugal was uninterested. Rejected there, Columbus then turned to Spain. The kingdom was still reshaping itself after centuries of war. Their Portuguese rivals threatened to seize the east by way of Africa. Spain needed a bold gamble of its own. Yet the court was distracted. After centuries of Muslim rule, the Reconquista had ended, but new tensions were rising. The church itself was full of corruption, and Isabella's eyes turned toward the conversos, Jews who had converted under pressure, yet were still suspected of secretly clinging to their old practices. In 1478, she established the Spanish Inquisition. While the Inquisition spread terror at home, Isabella and Ferdinand pursued the conquest of Granada, the last Muslim stronghold in Spain, with the Queen herself present near the battlefields. Even as Isabella worked to root out Jewish and Muslim influence, her crown's finances leaned heavily on men of Jewish heritage. Luis de Santangel, a Jewish converso and treasurer of Aragon, would become instrumental in backing Columbus's westward voyage, Jewish money helping launch Spain's global empire at the very moment that Jewish life in Spain was being dismantled. Columbus lingered in Spain for years, facing skepticism and personal hardships, but meanwhile he was cultivating allies. Among them were Juan Perez, a friar close to the Queen, and Luis de Santangel, the wealthy Jewish converso and royal treasurer. Just as he was about to give up, these 2 allies of Columbus would convince Isabella that this was a good idea. They helped finance the venture, and Columbus would be given a blank check of authority to gather any resources he needed. Imprisoned men were granted clemency so long as they agreed to join his expedition. In the summer of 1492, Columbus outfitted 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and Niña. As he prepared to sail, Spain would expel all unconverted Jews. 40,000 Jews fled the kingdom, and Columbus set sail west into uncharted waters. They stopped at the Canary Islands for repairs and to stock up on food, before turning west into the unknown Atlantic. For over 5 weeks they sailed without sight of land. Strange anomalies with the compass left them sailing blind for a period of time. But at last, near midnight on October 11th, the Pinta signaled land ahead. This moment was recorded by Bartolomeu de las Casas. A sailor named Rodrigo from Triana was the first to see land. The admiral, however, standing on the sterncastle at 10 o'clock, had also seen a light, although it was so faint that he couldn't say whether it might indicate land. He called Pero Gutierrez, steward of the king's table, telling him that he thought he had seen a light and asked him to look. He looked and saw it. The admiral then called Rodrigo Sanchez from Segovia, whom the king and queen had sent with the fleet as an overseer. He could see no light because he was in a bad position to see it. But after the admiral spoke, the light could be seen once or twice, like a small candle being lifted up. Although few thought it meant land, the admiral was certain they were near land. 2 hours after midnight, land could be made out about 2 leagues away. They'd reached the small island of Lucayos in the Bahamas. People that wore hardly any clothes came out, and the Spaniards headed to shore. The admiral took with him the royal standard, and the captains the 2 banners with the green cross, which the admiral carried on all of his vessels. On shore they saw very green trees, a lot of water, and various kinds of fruits. The admiral summoned the 2 captains and the others who had come ashore, and he ordered them to bear faithful witness that he was taking possession before all assembled, which he did, of this island for the king and queen. Columbus believed all these lands as a detour, thinking he was getting closer to Japan and China. He started documenting all of this in his letters that he intended for the queen to read. He described that the islanders were friendly and generous, eagerly trading parrots, cotton, and food for trinkets like beads and bells. Convinced they had no religion, he told the queen that they could easily be converted and even taken as what he called servants. He observed their dugout canoes and their seamanship, and when he saw small pieces of gold worn as ornaments, he immediately pressed them for where it came from. He seized several islanders to serve as interpreters and captives. A few of my sailors went after them on shore, but they fled like hens. We took their dugout aboard Nina. All of these islands are so green and beautiful that I don't know where to go first. My eyes never tire of looking upon this gorgeous greenery, so different from what we have at home. I believe there are many plants and trees here that would be very useful in Spain as dyes and medicinal spices, but it pains me not to be able to identify them. Arriving off this cape, I noted the most divinely sweet odor of flowers and trees coming off the land, the very sweetest odors on earth. Columbus's captives told him of 2 great islands, one of them being Colba, or the modern-day Cuba. These reports fed his conviction that he was near Asia, not a new continent. While exploring near a lagoon, Columbus and his men spotted a reptile, likely an iguana. When it darted into the shallow waters, they chased it down with spears to kill it, and planned to send its skin back to the queen as a curiosity from this strange land. Columbus also collected aloe, which he believed valuable, and he ordered half a ton brought aboard. Later they would approach a nearby village, its inhabitants fleeing as they saw the Spaniards. Columbus told his men not to loot, and he coaxed them back with beads and bells, eventually persuading them to fetch gourds of fresh water for the fleet. In late October 1492, Columbus thought he'd reached Japan. It was actually the coast of Cuba. He sent a landing party inland to find a king and deliver letters from Ferdinand and Isabella, even bringing along a linguist who was familiar with biblical and Eastern languages. While awaiting their return, he careened his ships and continued seizing captives, still convinced he was on the threshold of Asia. Yesterday, a dugout with 6 men came alongside the flagship and 5 of them came aboard. I ordered them detained, since I planned to bring them back with me. I later sent to a house on the western bank of the river, and they brought 7 women, young and old, and 3 boys. I seized these women because the men I'm bringing to Spain will behave better if they have their own women with them than if they go without. After leaving Cuba, Columbus sighted the mountains of Hispaniola, which he again thought might be Japan. The fertile land and friendly people impressed him, especially when a young cacique arrived with 200 attendants and pieces of gold ornaments. The people of this land were the Tainos. On Christmas Eve, disaster struck when the Santa Maria ran aground. Though the ship was lost, Columbus turned misfortune into opportunity. With the help and generosity of the local chief, who wept at their loss and guarded their goods with care, he established the first Spanish foothold, La Navidad, leaving 40 men with provisions, tools, and weapons. When he wrote to the king to tell about this, he stated, "I can tell your highness that nowhere in Castile would better care be taken of our things, of which not a shoelace was missing." The return voyage almost ended in tragedy. In February 1493, they ran into some severe storms. Columbus feared his discovery would be lost and his children forgotten, but the Niña survived, and in March he sailed back to Spain. He paraded 7 of these natives through the streets of different Spanish cities, displaying them to curious onlookers. All of this was enough to secure the crown's support for another voyage and to mark the beginning of Spain's empire in the New World. After consulting with the Pope, the crown would attempt to make the safety and well-being of the native populations a top priority. That safety and well-being of the natives would be very difficult to enforce. clear across the world. Columbus would soon set sail again, this time with 17 vessels and 1,200 men. They made landfall by November of 1493 at the island of Dominica, and then eventually sailed to the nearby island of Guadeloupe. It was here that they encountered the Carib people, the cannibals that the Tainos people had warned them about. Dr. Diego Chanca describes what he witnessed. These people raid other islands, taking any women they can find, especially young, beautiful girls who they keep for their service and hold as concubines. They take so many that in 50 houses we saw no males, and more than 20 of the captives were girls. These women say that they are treated with what seems to be unbelievable cruelty, and that their captors devour the male babies they have by them, bringing up only the babies of their own women. The men who they capture, they take to their houses, then butcher and eat them, saying there is nothing in this world like the flesh of a man. It looks like they believe this because of the bones we found in these houses. Everything that could have been gnawed was gnawed. Whatever was left simply too tough to be eaten. In one house we found a human neck boiling in a pot. The Spaniards would take some of these boys as well as some young teenage girls back to Spain with them to, quote, present them to the king as a sample. As they sailed around nearby islands capturing more Caribs, one group decided to fight back, shooting arrows at the strange men. This went on for some time until they wounded their leader with a lance. This scene is described by Miquel de Sueno. Since we judged this Carib's wound to be fatal, we threw him overboard, but to our surprise, he suddenly began to swim away. We therefore recaptured him, and with the grappling hook dragged him over the ship's rail and hacked off his head with an axe. The other Caribs and slaves were later sent back to Spain. While in the boat, I captured an extremely beautiful Carib woman, who the admiral later gave to me. I took her with me to my quarters. She was naked according to their custom, and I conceived a desire to have my way with her. When Columbus's fleet reached Hispaniola in 1493, the mood was confident. He had left behind a small garrison of 39 men at the settlement of La Navidad during his first voyage. They were meant to guard Spain's claim, win the friendship of the Taino, and prepare for the larger colony to come. What he found instead was devastation. The fort had been burned to the ground, the houses destroyed, and every last Spaniard was dead. The story spread quickly. The men had abused native women, plundered resources, and provoked the local cacique. The Taino people rose up and overwhelmed the small outpost and wiped it from existence. Columbus quickly founded a new settlement on the north coast. La Isabela would be the first permanent European town in the Americas, but almost from the start it proved to be a disaster. The harbor was shallow and poor, the land was swampy and disease-ridden, Spanish crops failed to grow, forcing the colonists to rely on dwindling supplies from the Taino, whose goodwill had already worn thin. Soon hunger, dysentery, and fevers and scurvy would spread through the colony. Many men were too weak to work. Determined to salvage the mission, Columbus would march inland to search for gold. The expedition reached a fertile valley, dotted with streams carrying flecks of gold dust. Roads were carved through the wilderness and forts were raised to impose control. Resistance came swiftly, and the same cacique who had destroyed La Navidad organized attacks. In 1494, he took to the sea again. It was during this time he discovered the island of Jamaica, describing it as fertile and green. But storms battered his fleet, food ran low, and morale sank even lower. Every step forward seemed to deepen the colony's misery. By 1495, La Isabela was collapsing. Disease and famine ravaged the settlement. A hurricane tore through the town, reducing its fragile houses to ruins. Desperate for tribute, Columbus ordered that every Taino adult must deliver a quota of gold or cotton to the Spanish. Those who failed were punished. By 1496, this experiment with colonization was falling apart. Columbus was too distracted with his fantasy of finding the Emperor of China rather than maintaining and organizing a successful colony. His men were demoralized, insubordinate, and sick, and the vast wealth he had promised to Spain was nowhere to be found. During this time, a settlement named Santo Domingo would be raised, which is now the capital of the modern Dominican Republic. In March of 1496, he gathered what strength remained and sailed back to Spain. He carried some gold and cotton, a few exotic plants and animals, and captured 550 natives, many of them dying on the voyage home. When he arrived in June, his reputation was already in question. Upon arrival, the crown expressed its displeasure with the captured natives being brought to Spain, under the guise of servants. But despite all this, the crown noticed that Columbus had discovered something remarkable. Still unsure what this new land was, the king and queen granted more voyages. 3 ships were to provide provisions to the colonies at Hispaniola, and 3 ships were to go with Columbus to explore. They went further south this time. By the summer of 1498, Columbus's 3rd voyage was near exhaustion. The ships creaked under the rolling waves, and wine caskets were split. The crew was dangerously thirsty. Trade winds carried them toward unknown places, and on July 31st, the lookouts saw land. They found water and took the chance to recover their strength. To the south, faint on the horizon, stretched what we now know as Venezuela, a new continent that had been discovered, but they did not quite know it yet. They continued to sail until they encountered canoes with well-armed men. Columbus tried to lure them closer with gifts, then with music and dancing, but the meeting quickly turned violent. The islanders shot arrows and Spaniards returned fire with crossbows, and the canoes scattered back to shore. For days, Columbus tested the strong currents of the Gulf, watching the ebbs and flow of a river so powerful that the sea itself seemed to change. Then came terror. On August 4th, during the dead of the night, the crews heard a deafening roar. The ocean rose in a mountain of water, bearing down on their ships. Columbus confessed that he feared the wave would break them apart, but the surge passed harmlessly beneath the keels, and when dawn broke, the fleet continued north, astonished but alive. Columbus started to note anomalous compass readings. The needle was drifting in a way that his pilots couldn't explain. He convinced himself he was sailing upon a bulge of the globe. In a letter to the crown, he wrote that the earth was not perfectly round, but pear-shaped, with the protuberance near the equator, higher and closer to the heavens, and that this elevated region might be where the great rivers of the world rise, perhaps even the earthly paradise. Unfortunately for Columbus, his health started to fade, and his eyesight was poor and he was in constant pain. He claimed he didn't sleep for more than 30 days, and scholars believe these were symptoms of a bacterial infection he probably got from eating foul food. By 1500, reports of misrule and mismanagement of the expedition had reached Spain. The monarchs dispatched Francisco de Bobadilla, a royal commissioner who was sent to restore order. Bobadilla arrived at Santo Domingo, immediately took command, and ordered Columbus arrested. Christopher Columbus was put in shackles and taken back to Spain. It was humiliation beyond belief, and he later wrote to the Queen about what he thought was an injustice. But when he arrived to Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella ordered his chains be taken off immediately. They pardoned him and promised him respect, but they did not restore his governorship. The crown had taken the New World out of Columbus's hands. Still, his third voyage changed history. He had taken the Europeans all the way to a new continent, South America. No longer the governor, Columbus convinced Ferdinand and Isabella to let him sail as an explorer for the crown once more. In 1502, he departed with 4 caravels and 140 men. His 13-year-old son Ferdinand came too, and he recorded the journey in detail. The mission, to find a strait through the Indies that would lead directly to the riches of Asia. The voyage would begin with a very bad omen. He was forbidden to land in Hispaniola, so Columbus anchored offshore to warn Governor Ovando of a coming storm. Ovando ignored him and sent a treasure fleet of 28 ships to Spain, and within days a hurricane struck. Nearly the entire convoy was destroyed, drowning hundreds and sending tons of gold to the seabed. Columbus's 4 ships survived, and he saw this as divine will. But what followed was a nightmare of storms. For 88 days, Columbus's fleet was hammered by wind and waves. He later wrote that the sea boiled like a cauldron, the sky blazed like fire, and rain fell as though the world was drowning in a second flood. After experiencing a brief relief from the storms off the coast of Honduras in 1502, Columbus encountered a massive Maya trading canoe, the first European contact with the Mesoamerican world. He seized the chief trader and his family to eventually take back to Spain. He then turned south and faced the worst weather yet. In addition to these various terrors, another danger appeared. It was a waterspout that on Tuesday, December 13th, passed right among the ships. If we had not dissolved it by reciting the Gospel of St. John, there is no doubt that it would have swamped whatever it struck. The water was lifted in a column right up to the clouds, a column thicker than a barrel, twisting like a whirlwind. After facing such contrary winds and seas, with the fleet practically dismembered and the crews on the point of exhaustion, we finally experienced a day or two of quiet seas. During this period, however, the ships were surrounded by sharks, which struck fear into all, but especially into the doomsayers. For just as they say vultures can find a dead body by its smell from very far away, some thought the sharks shared this power. We slaughtered many of these sharks, catching them with a hook and chain until we finally could kill no more. Although some took these sharks as a bad omen and others just as bad fish, everybody did them the honor of eating them. So short were we of food for having spent 8 months at sea and having consumed all the meat and fish we had carried from Spain. Moreover, with the heat and the dampness, the biscuits were so full of maggots that, with God as my witness, I saw many men who refused to eat their porridge until nightfall so as not to see them. Columbus would then anchor off of Panama, where he found gold that was abundant in the soil. The Spaniards would create a settlement here, but relations with the local chief would collapse into violence. Broken and exhausted, Columbus drifted again until disaster struck. In 1503, his caravels had been eaten down by worms, finally disintegrated on the coast of Jamaica. They would be stranded there for a year, surviving by the grace of the Taínos people, who Columbus would impress by predicting a lunar eclipse. His son Ferdinand would document this. The admiral remembered that in 3 days' time, just after dark, there would be an eclipse of the moon. He therefore sent an Indian we had with us from Hispaniola to summon the ranking Indians of the region, inviting them to a feast where he wished to speak with them. Arriving during the daytime, before the eclipse was to occur, the caciques were told through their interpreter that we were Christians, which meant that we believed in a God who dwelt in the heavens and whom we served. This God took care of people and punished the wicked. He told them that as God had seen that the lack of interest the Indians had in trading with the Christians for food had him very angry, and he planned to send them a great famine. Since they obviously did not believe him, however, he would give them a sign from the heavens. If they paid close attention to the moon tonight, he said, they would see it rise angry and swollen. But when the moon rose, they paid close attention. Since the higher it rose, the darker it became, as the blackness crept over it. So astonished and frightened were they that they hurried toward the ships from every side, begging the admiral to ask God not to send his wrath upon them, promising that they would in the future bring everything that the Spaniards required. To this the admiral replied that he would have to take counsel with God, and he secreted himself to his cabin as the moon darkened further, with the Indians crying out for his help. When the admiral saw that the eclipse would soon end and the moon brighten, he came out and explained that he had spoken with his God, offering petitions on their behalf, and that he had promised in their name that they would be good in the future and bring the Christians whatever food and other items they required. God had pardoned them, said the admiral, and as a sign of his pardon, the moon would now lose its angry swelling. When the Indians saw that this in fact was occurring, they thanked the admiral profusely and sang the praises of his God. They carried on with this until the eclipse had passed. From then on, they took great care to provide us with whatever we needed, praising the Christian God unceasingly. They were stranded for a year now, and Columbus's secretary, Diego Mendez, risked a canoe voyage to Hispaniola to fetch rescue. And in 1504, Columbus returned to Spain for the last time. He had not found the strait to Asia. He had not established a lasting colony. But he had sailed the coast of Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama, proving that the Caribbean was bounded by vast new continents, although he didn't necessarily know that yet. Gold was now being mined in abundance in Santo Domingo, and the discovery of it elsewhere confirmed there was plenty of it to be found. By 1506, the man that had crossed the ocean 4 different times was now a shadow of himself. He returned to Spain sick and nearly blind. Christopher Columbus would live out the last of his days in Valladolid, petitioning in vain for the wealth and titles he believed he was due. I myself have profited little from the 20 years of laborious and dangerous service. Today in Castile, I have no roof over my head. If I need a meal or a bed, I must go to an inn or a tavern, and I frequently have no money with which to pay the bill. He died on May 20th, 1506, at just 55 years old, penniless, embittered, and still convinced that he had reached Asia. And thanks for watching my videos. I got a members only channel where I have some amazing content for $5 a month. It'd be a great way to support the channel. I also have these amazing maps here that would be a great holiday gift, birthday gift for any of your loved ones. I got these national park 3D relief maps and really hundreds, I think thousands of maps that you can find at Muirway Maps. And if you use the specific link in my bio, it'll give me credit for your purchase, and it'd be a great way to support the channel. Another great way to support my work would be to buy my book, Enigmatic North America, Legends, Oddities, and Controversial History. I wrote this over 2 years ago, traveling around all of North America, Mexico, the United States, documenting different anomalies, strange history, hoaxes, and some genuine mysteries that have still yet to be solved. I'll have all this linked in my bio. Thanks so much for watching my channel. Please like, subscribe, share this with someone you think might find this interesting. Stay tuned. We got a whole series we're doing on the conquistadors, explorers all over the world. Thanks for watching Incredible History. I'll catch you all later.